Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. Thankful for our visitors, the deans from Ohio, that have come to make sure Jesse is acceptable to have for a gospel meeting in April. So good to have them with us. All right, we good now? Everybody here? All right. So finishing up in lesson 5, Lord willing. So we're talking about discipline is kind of our primary focus, and so we ended last week talking about this idea of instructive versus corrective discipline, and just very, very briefly got into examples of both, and Miss Shirley brought up spanking, so we're going to talk about that a little more tonight. But before we do, if you would turn over to Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll pick up with lesson or question number 4. So Hebrews chapter 12. And we'll start over here with Miss Shirley, and then we'll just work our way back. So let's read 6 through 11 and taking a verse apiece. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to start with you.
For whom the Lord loved, he chastens, scourges every son who he receives. If you endure chasten, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten?
But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have made human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live?
For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness.
Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it.
All right, I think we can all testify that discipline, chastening does not seem joyful, especially when you've been on the receiving end of it. We talked last week in question number 2 about different words as far as discipline and chastening, and so depending on which translation you're using, the New American Standard in most of the instances here, verses 6 through 11, uses the word discipline. I know the King James uses the word chastening. So there's still this idea of training, both corrective and instructive. But after reading that passage there, what truths about discipline in the home can we learn from that? Norm?
Discipline is done when it's done right. It's done with love, and it's done with concern. And if you get that right, then everybody benefits from it. The one providing the discipline, the one who's being disciplined.
Okay. Drew?
I was going to say that discipline is painful at times for both parties, but we have to remember the importance of it.
Yeah. I'm smiling because I remember you always heard, you know, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. I don't know that's entirely true. It definitely does hurt. It's not fun. It's not fun, you know, when you have a child that is, it's not fun the fact that they need to be disciplined, and you've got to do that, but it's not fun actually administering that discipline either, whatever form that may be, whether that's through a stern talking or it's through more of a corporal punishment. It's not fun. Others? What we learn from this? Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, the text brings out with God with us, his children, that it's something that is needed, it's something that's necessary, and if you don't receive it, there's a problem. You're illegitimate. And so it should be expected, it should even be desired by us, because we want to be accepted by him, we want to be his children, and he's only going to do what's best for us. And when, going back to what Norm first commented on, he does it because he loves us. And so same with our parenting of our children. It's needed, it's necessary, yeah, unpleasant for both sides of it, but it's God's will, it's what's best.
Yeah, Clarissa?
And you can see the fruits of that. I mean, just working in the public school system, in the elementary, the ones that, we have behavioral issues with, they either, don't have that solid father and mother in the household. You can just see the fruits of, if they're disciplined, then they show respect. They, not everything is kind of about them. Then you just see the fruits of it. I kind of lost my thought a little bit. I can't think of what all I'm trying to say, but it's important. You're showing love to make them that good light out in the world. And this is how you do that.
Bonnie?
It specifically calls out fathers here in this passage, and I think that's important to notice, because most of the time, if you have a stay-at-home mom, she's the one that's going to be overseeing that. There's nothing wrong with that, but the fathers are ultimately, they need to be involved. They need to know what's going on, and they are responsible for whatever is happening there.
Yeah, obviously mothers can do a lot of good. We'll talk about Timothy next week, or next lesson, but then ultimately the fathers are the ones that are held responsible. We think about Eli and the fact that he did not really discipline his sons. And yeah, that is something that is oftentimes lost, that the fathers are the ones that are ultimately responsible. Not that the mother shouldn't be providing discipline. They're going to be providing a lot of discipline. I remember several times growing up when my mom, her discipline was, you wait until your dad gets home. Those were always the worst words to hear, because it's typically when my dad was on midnights, and so when he got home off midnights, he was extra grizzly. And so when you heard those words, it was serious business. Go ahead, Norm.
I thought the phrase in the New American Standard in verse 11, where if a child has been trained by this in the right way, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. When you live a life of doing the right thing as God has designed this world to be done, then peace. You have a peace of mind. The policeman's not there to come take you away. You're not waiting for dad to come home to spank you. Peace is the fruit of that kind of a life. And what a wonderful gift to give to our children, or to anybody who has never had the discipline, and then all of a sudden gets into a situation where somebody cares enough to provide the discipline to them, and their life changes, and they thank them for it.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of what we talked about last week with question number 1 with Proverbs 22:6, that if you train them up in the way that they should go, then when they're old, that they're not going to depart from it. So it all kind of ties in there. So how do you think the Lord chastens us? Very clearly it says that he chastens us because he does love us, but how does the Lord chasten us? Okay, he chastens us through his word. Okay.
Through the allowing us to make our mistakes and then reaping the consequences of those mistakes, so that we might understand that what we've done was not according to his will. And it's designed every time to improve the condition of our soul. And we do it to improve the conditions of our kids' attitudes. We call it attitude adjustment, but it's literally we're trying to shape their soul. God's doing the same thing. We've only got physical means, but he's got the spiritual means to set that about. And just like we hate doing it because we want them to not do the bad things, we want them to do the right things, he's the same way. He doesn't want us to do the bad things, he wants us to do the right things.
Yeah, there's obviously training and discipline that happens, not necessarily because somebody has done something wrong. As parents, we have to remember that we don't just act when our children do something wrong. We're trying to lead them in this path of righteousness, and so we're trying to direct them. We're trying to to help prepare them, which is what God is doing with us. And so oftentimes, especially in the case of the early Christians, they were persecuted. That's chastening, that's discipline, that's training that they're receiving. Obviously, we know about Job. Job wasn't being disciplined because he had done anything wrong. And so we have to remember that as parents too, though. It's an ongoing process because we're trying to lead them in a better way. Not that they've necessarily gone off of the way, but trying to help them to be better prepared for the way. Sam?
And a lot of wisdom that comes from the Bible involves being diligent about your work while you're able to do it. I think in the same manner, it's easier to discipline a child than it is to correct an adult who was never disciplined as a child. And because the consequences become greater, because the parents are no longer shielding the children from such consequences, because they're not held accountable for them when they're at a young age, and that's the perfect opportunity for them to make those mistakes and then be taught not to do so that they can, they can bear that peaceful fruit, as what Norm was talking about. And when God disciplines us, a way that he does that is through, I think Norm said it, Norm P., but letting us deal with the consequences of our actions, much like physical laws like gravity and phenomena like that. Human beings have the ability, they have their own free will and they can make their own choices, but you can't separate your choices from those consequences. You can never choose what the consequences are and kind of mix and match them. There's always going to be a reaction to what you do. And I think in that, God can discipline us by letting us make our own decisions and then deal with the consequences that come from that.
Yeah. All right.
Part of it's baked into the system. And, the way God has physically designed the creation, there are certain things that if you stray from the path, it will not go well for you. You could die, literally, from a physical standpoint. But the beauty of God's Word is it answers the question, why? Why should we do this? And it's God's beautiful instructions that give us the answers to that. And so many people go through life having bad things happen to them over and over again, and they don't understand why, and they get all the wrong answers to that question because they're constantly asking, why? Why is this happening to me? Why? And God provides that answer.
And I think that's the question that we have to remember the answer to as parents, because the Lord is doing it not because he's delighting in it. It's not like he's getting some form of pleasure in that, but he does it because it is beneficial to us, and it is because he loves us. Mr. Dean?
Yeah, last week I was at my audiologist, and in the office they had a saying there that stated, nothing improves a person's hearing more than praise. I think we have to remember that along with the discipline for our children, we have to give them praise when they deserve it. There has to be a balance there.
Yeah. The training has got to include some when they're doing things that are right, and praising them for that, as well as when there needs to be corrective, for sure. And they do tend to listen a little bit better in those situations. All right, anything else on question number 4? All right, number 5, what can we learn from the Proverbs about corrective discipline? And I listed several passages there, so we'll talk about that first, then we'll talk about is corrective discipline abuse. Is it possible for corrective discipline to be abused? If so, when? So just from those passages, and for the sake of time, we won't go through and read those right now, but what can we learn from Proverbs about corrective discipline?
Anger doesn't need to be involved.
All right, anger, Melissa said that anger does not need to be involved. Ken?
It should be administered promptly.
But not
Don't
too
put it off. I think our government could learn a lot from that.
Okay, so Ken said promptly, Melissa said not too promptly, so.
If you need to cool off, you need to cool off. Because we're
y'all know where I work. And 90% of the abuse cases that we have, that will be the parents' first, I'll say excuse or reason or whatever is, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't think. And this is the parents that are not like chronic. I'm talking just ones that, you know, have a case called in, and, you know, it's a one-time offense, it's a one-time thing, or it's not a regular occurrence. I mean, we have some that are repeat offenders all the time. But
Yeah.
I'm talking about, you know, the reason is almost always, you know, I let my anger get the best of me. And
Yeah.
I have been to that point, to
You
where I
better
had
not-
to walk
not with
away
Morgan,
for a
though.
bit to go back.
I mean, she's sitting right beside you.
She is, but she's not really what I'm talking about. Although there have been times with her too, but, I mean, there are times when you need to take a few minutes. And you have to be smart enough to know that. And you have to love them and yourself enough to know that.
Yeah, I remember in high school, my English teacher, the one that gave me a 0 on the book report for the Berenstain Bears, for some reason I remember things that she said a lot more than others, but I don't know why I remember this, but she used to talk about how in disciplining her children, she would wait like a certain period of time because she was trying to make sure that she had herself in check before she actually administered whatever discipline it was going to be. And I remember, of course, when you're a freshman in high school and you're still getting disciplined by your father, I always thought he just did it immediately, and he was pretty upset. So he wasn't. He did it out of love. But you don't feel that way when you're a kid. Bonnie?
But there is something to be said about doing it pretty promptly, especially I think with young children, but even from the Bible, you've got Proverbs 13:24 that talks about how he that loveth him chaseth him betimes. That's the King James Version, but that means promptly. That means in the New American Standard, it says diligently, but the idea there is like pretty quickly. Like you don't want to wait to, especially with a young child, if they're misbehaving, if you wait a couple hours, they're going to have no idea what you're disciplining them for. So yes, you have to be cool, calm, and collected for sure. You don't want to just react because you're upset, but you do need to act pretty quickly when it comes to those young children and when they're misbehaving.
Do that one more time, I'll get you.
So Ray will give a warning, and that's it. One of the things that I have written down here is if you wait too long to start disciplining your child, it may be too late. And so I know we're talking about promptly, and yes, when the child is young and they don't understand, you can't communicate with them verbally, and so that's how you communicate with them, is when they do something that is that they don't need to do anymore. But another thing in regards to promptly is from the beginning. And you can't wait until they're 5, 6, 7, 8, or they're a teenager, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to start the disciplining or the training process, because at that point, it's going to be too late. And so we have to make sure that we don't wait to start administering that to him. If you want your child to quit foolish behavior, then you got to punish him when he acts foolishly. So, Ms. Dean?
I also think the word diligently, there's a certain quickness there to it, but it also means persistence. We have to be consistent. You know, you should, oh, you're okay, we'll forget about it this time, but don't do it again. You know, you need to be consistent in your discipline.
Yeah, that's a huge one, because if you're inconsistent with the discipline, if you're inconsistent with the training, now they're getting mixed messages, and well, okay, so one time I do this and it was pretty harsh punishment, and next time I do it and not really, and so maybe it's okay. So yeah, we've got to definitely be consistent. Norm P?
It's also how discipline is, people use discipline. There's different ways that we define it in our heads. A lot of the times, especially in Proverbs, it's an older translation as far as our language, English, and how it's translated out. It could be translated instructed. or instruction, because that's the form of the Hebrew that's there, it's an instructive. But that's a really old term or definition for our language. Like 30 years ago, it was in the dictionary. You're going to find punitive there where discipline is at, because we've moved that away, we've moved away from that instruction. Part of what discipline is. And that's, if you're coming at any discipline, not from the part of a teacher, but from the part of an avenger, you fail. Because the whole purpose, the entire point of it is to instruct them, either in good behavior that you want to continue, or bad behavior you need them to stop. Either way, that's the discipline part, the instruction part of it. You need to keep walking this way. And sometimes even when they don't matter, you just walk this way. Trust me, it's going to be better. And then just move them in that direction. It's how they teach discipline in the military. Is you're marching forever. Everywhere you go, you're marching, and you're trying to march in step. And you're singing these cadence. And after 3 weeks, you're like, what in the world are we doing this for? And then you have a ceremony and a competition about all the things you've been doing for 3 weeks straight and 13 miles a day that you were doing. And lo and behold, you do well. You're making all your movements, all your faces. You weren't beat to do it, but you were shown, and you had to practice it over and over and over and over again, and then you get the result of, hey, I can actually do this. And that the instruction is sometimes monotonous, sometimes it's tedious, sometimes we don't want to do it because it takes a while, particularly if they're stubborn. And they don't want to take to it. And that's where the consistency, the resiliency of that comes in, is that you have to stick with it over and over and over. As the teacher, as the adult, you can't tire of it. And that's, I think, where we often slip. That's where we're human. That's where we'll drop our guard, is that we will tire of being the instructor. And we'll try to become an avenger because we're just tired now of, I'm trying to instruct you, you're just not listening anymore. I'm just going to come and get you.
One of the things that I had written down, I read this from somewhere. It says, if your punishment is not strong enough, soon enough, and consistent enough to change both their behavior and attitude, you have accomplished nothing. So what is meant there, though, by the rod? What's the rod? All right, so I heard switch, I heard leather belt.
Paddle.
Paddle.
My rod was a fly swatter.
Hot water.
That's what
The Bible defines
A
the
spatula.
rod.
What did that?
The Bible defines the rod as comfort along with the staff, you know?
Yeah. This is true. So with all of these, whether it's a fly swatter or it's the paddle that was used that was actually broke on me one time. So these are all forms of or instruments used to discipline. And so is that abuse? It can be. All right. When does it turn into abuse?
Well, it could be abused if you didn't do it either, too.
Okay, it can be abused, yes, if you didn't do it, but when you are in the process of disciplining a child, when does it become abuse? Let me go with Tiffany first.
I mean, working in the ER, you see a lot of things that happen to children. I mean, I believe in discipline, but if you're beating your child hard enough that you're breaking a bone or that you're giving them a concussion, you've got a problem. I mean, I believe in discipline your children, but hurting them is not how it works. There's a difference in hurting them, spanking them and oh, mom, that hurt and you've got a red mark on their leg versus, I mean, we've had children brought in that have had broken bones that we've had to send through investigation, and sometimes it's repeated, so that's not okay.
Definitely. Norm?
When it turns into you doing it for you, to make you feel better, and not for the benefit of the one receiving it, that's when you've crossed the line.
That's no longer the chastening of the Lord. Melissa?
I think when out of the anger and not out of the love, that's when it crosses the line. And there are times, and I mean, I have worked for DCS for 26 years. I've seen everything. I've seen pictures of kids that have been bruised that I do not think that they were abused. Because I know that we have disciplined ours and left a bruise, and it was not abuse. So there are lines that are sometimes drawn that aren't necessarily true lines. And case managers do know that. I think a lot of people, this happened when one of ours was little, I'm sure you can guess which one. And, I was terrified for a week that somebody was gonna see the bruise that was left on him. But he's like his daddy. If you push on Brent hard, he's gonna bruise. Me, you could beat me with a baseball bat, and I'm not gonna bruise. It's the difference in.
That would be abuse,
in our-
right?
But I'm saying, I don't bruise like he does, and Braden does. And I was terrified for a week that somebody was gonna see the bruises on him. I was scared. Of course, I was thinking, well, they'll just come interview me at my desk, but still, it is a concern. And I think a lot of people don't give our CPS workers the credit that they're due for what they see, because they see everything from those bruises to the death of these children. They know the difference most of the time. There have been a few, I'd say that, take it a little bit too far, but, 95% of the time, they're gonna get it pretty much right. Or they're gonna have to send them back when they don't want to.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand either.
Larson?
And I just think you can't even, I know that every child's different, but if you start really young, and it doesn't even have to be anything that even causes them a little bit of pain or discomfort. When Zoe or the other ones would babble during service, I would kind of pop the part that is the problem on the mouth. She never cried, it never hurt her, but she would be and so she would get it. So if you start, again, we all know not to cross lines, but if you start when they're really young, then by the time they're 5 or 6, 7 or 8 or whatever, you're not really doing physical, rod type punishments like we're talking about, because they know what you mean, I don't know. That's just kind of how I've found it to be. Start really young, and it doesn't have to escalate as they get older and older and older.
Unless they're really stubborn.
Unless, I get it, they're,
We're not gonna talk about John right now. So,
she was saying that children are different, and I think you have to really study your child too, to know what works with them and what doesn't, because like you said, some are really stubborn, and you could keep hitting them for a long time, and his nephew refused to cry, and unfortunately he had a father that it just made him madder and madder, and that was bad. But I don't remember ever getting spanked after I was 7 or something. But I remember when I was in 4th grade, and that was the first year we had a television, and the whole family was in there watching TV, and I was in 4th grade, and I had a ton of homework. And so I was in there having to do homework, and we were living in somebody else's house, and so with their furniture and everything, because my dad was a teacher and he was in school, and teachers rented houses from other teachers who were gone someplace else. So we had all their furniture. And I was sitting there, and I was so frustrated that with my pen, I dug a little hole in the desk, and my father, it was the worst punishment I ever had. He came in and he said, when he saw it, he said, "I thought we had raised you better than that." And just went on talking like that. And Ken knows, you take better care, that's what he told me, you take better care of someone else's things than you do of your own. And that to me is like a huge thing, I would never hurt, if I borrowed something, I make sure it's perfect, That made the biggest impact on me.
Yeah, and oftentimes the rebuke can be just as severe as, or even more, possibly than even spanking. Marissa?
The point of corrective discipline is to correct. So at the point where the lesson is no longer the goal, then that's heading toward abuse. When it becomes just hurting instead of correction, then you should know that you're headed toward abuse if you're not already there.
Yeah. Sam?
You get.
Terry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, kids notice, like Allison, this is her first year in public school. She's 6 years old, and Andy says sometimes I don't discipline her enough, but we tried to discipline her, like Clarissa said, from a young age. And they notice kids that have not been disciplined. There's a little girl in Allison's class that she's caused trouble every day of school. Every day. They've had issues with this student every day. And Allison, she'll come home sometimes, and one day last week, the little girl had kicked another student in the nose, and so she got sent to the principal's office. So she comes home and Mama, so-and-so kicked so-and-so in the nose, and she got sent to the principal's office, and she got in trouble. She said, "It's a good thing she's not your kid, right, Mama?" She said, "You would really get on to her, Mama." And so she said, "You'd whip her, right, Mama?" And so, but I'm just saying, if they are started at a young age, like Clarissa said, they notice kids that don't have respect and that haven't had that discipline that they have. And so at least that tells me in my mind, well, we're doing hopefully something right, And so she tells me they have this little behavior chart that the teacher fills out every day, and it comes home in their little folders. And she said, "I get a smiley face every day, Mama." I said, "You better always have a smiley face on that paper." And so, but I'm just saying, they notice. And so, are they perfect? No. Kids aren't perfect. We're not perfect as parents, but we try. So.
I just forgot I'm having a senior moment, and I can't remember what I was going to say, but it was something on the positive side. The idea that example is a very good, you have to show a very, very good example to a child, but you're also, I remember now, you need to help develop a conscience for this child in order for them to discern right from wrong, good and evil.
Sam?
It sounds kind of horrible, but when I was in third grade, I remember not having empathy at all. It was really weird. I just didn't understand that the world did not revolve around me. I truthfully, I would get in trouble at school a whole lot for things I didn't even realize why I was getting in trouble. And now looking back on it, I'm thinking, well, you were an idiot, you shouldn't know that. But I didn't understand it then. But the easiest way to convey to me that what I was doing was wrong was by whipping me. And that, it made sense to me. That was crystal clear. I didn't lack any understanding of what I did was wrong when I was getting, beat for it. But my mom, I think, was the better discipliner in this regard, because she would tell me, hey, you just did this and it was wrong. Go upstairs, you're going to get a spanking in 15 minutes or something. So, like you said, waiting for your dad, and when I'm sitting on my bed waiting for my mom, that's the worst part of it, because you're just dreading it. And I remember when, toward the last few spankings that I got when I was a little bit older, I would be just as nervous for them. But, after I got hit, I thought, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And I don't know if anyone else has had that reaction. It was my mom, so I'm sure if someone else would have done it, I wouldn't have felt the same way. But I was still receiving that discipline without, being hurt in that way. I think that was important. I got spanked a lot by my dad, And to be honest, most of the time I didn't know what I was getting spanked for. And I think that has a higher chance of confusing and harming the kid more than actually properly disciplining them. But when I remember, the worst part about getting a spanking, it was always my mom telling me that I was going to get a spanking, and then waiting that period of time so I can build up that sense of dread for it. I think that's the discipline right there. I think it's a good thing because it taught me, it got me over my lack of empathy phase or whatever I had.
So why do I ask this question in 2024? Well, I'm asking about corrective discipline and spanking being abuse. Clarissa?
Well, I mean, all of that has shifted even from when we were kids. When we were kids, you still got paddled at school. That girl would have gone to the principal's office.
She would have
and
gotten
got a couple of licks, and the parents would have been called probably beforehand or whatever. And that would have been a big deal, and it probably would have, did, I'm not saying, obviously there's no absolutes in anything, but it does a lot of course correct. Literally every day, I see kids they sent to the principal's office, and they're just sitting in the hallway of like the office, like at a desk, and their work's in front of them, they're not gonna work, they're just like sitting there because they don't need to be in the classroom, or they're sorting Legos with the principal. I mean, that's kind of like, I get a break from my classroom, and it's all because there's been a shift in society, certainly a shift in the school system of how you're going to handle these behavioral issues. But it's not making it better. In fact, it's getting worse and worse. And obviously, we all know that starts ultimately at the home. But the hands are being tied so tight in other places because it's frowned upon as far as it's not being, that's not how you are going to get anything across to kids, or that's not how you train. So the mind shift has shifted, and I mean, we can all see, even without not being in public schools, how it's getting worse and worse as far as lack of respect for people, property, anything.
I'm going to get the bell. Ms. Shirley?
Well, when I went to school, you got a spanking if you needed it at school, but then you got another one when you got home. So, and I know this last year when Teresa was teaching, she had one little boy, she had to sit right next to her all the time. She couldn't put him out, sitting with the rest of them. She had to sit him right by her because he was just out of control. That's the only way she had any way to teach a class.
Yeah, unfortunately, our society, to be honest with you, most of Western society is dominated by secular humanism, which means the Bible is completely ignored. And so this is something, and because of that, because of the ignoring of the Bible, and it's all about us, it's all about me, the notion of this idea of spanking is automatically equated to child abuse. And so we have to recognize that as Christians. And just because that's what society tells us does not mean that that's true. All right, so we still have to adhere to God's wisdom. And oftentimes that's what it boils down to, the wisdom and the discipline that we administer. But I think the bottom line is, and it's been touched on, I know Melissa and Marissa both talked about this, if you're doing it out of anger, you've crossed the line. All right? God does not chasten us because he's mad at us. He chastens us because he loves us. And so when we're no longer doing it because we're trying to correct an attitude or correct a behavior, but we're doing it because it's going to make us feel better because we're so upset, that's a problem. All right, real quick, let's hit number 6. So this is a couple of hypothetical, not hypothetical questions. So how would you respond to the situations below? Number 1, a parent says to you, I love my children too much to ever spank them. And that's been said. So how do you respond to that? Gil?
That's not love, that's hate. If you're not disciplining them, that's not in their best interest. It's not love.
All right. So, Ken?
You have to spank them anyway. Hurts you more than it hurts them. You have to do it.
All right. Norm?
If they don't, someone who doesn't care will. And usually when it's the law, and it may not be a spanking, it may be an execution. And that's a very poor way to send your child. straight to the gallows.
Yeah. Part of wanting the best for your child is when you send your child to school, you don't want your child to be like that one that the other kids go home and tell about how horrible they were. You want your child to be liked and appreciated. And if you don't discipline them, you're not helping your child. You're not helping them have a good life.
All right, so the last one there, a parent says to you, I love this new gentle parenting approach. You should try it. I think your family would benefit from it. And then I give kind of an explanation. If you haven't heard of gentle parenting, that's the new thing. So how would you respond to someone in that situation? Marissa, she's excited to answer this one.
Gentle parenting is for gentle children. We do not have gentle children. We have destruction-focused little she-goblins with a bed for chaos. So we have to square up. Sorry about that.
That's why children today don't have respect for school, teachers, elderly, or anybody. And that's why they're out committing all these crimes that you hear about in the news every day. Heard about 11-year-olds today that robbed a bank. 11 years old.
Yeah.
Crazy. What we have to, those people probably don't realize or must not realize is that parents and children are not partners. Like we're going to sit down and try to figure out how we're going to handle the situation.
Yeah, that's what it is.
And the thing to realize is that kids don't know how to act until you teach them how to act.
Yeah.
And that's the reason our prisons are full of criminals.
Well, I don't know, as I was reading more, I was going to say, you maybe could do parts of this if you start young with the kind of discipline that we're talking about. But I mean, a 2-year-old, you're not really going to be able to like work together. I don't know. It's just, you're not going to be able to reason with each other. But I mean, obviously, then I disagree on that as far as if they're a teenager, yeah, you might not have to spank them, but if they do something wrong, then they should feel shame, and there obviously should be some punishment involved. I mean, anyway.
This was Randy Gentry's philosophy, right?
Yeah, exactly. My daddy didn't know what gentle parenting was. So I'm going to go just a second because I want to end with this as we talk about discipline. And this is the most important thing that we need to remember. When a child is conceived, now you're taking the responsibility of a soul. And you cannot forget that. So you and your spouse are responsible for bringing this life into the world, and you are largely responsible for where his or her soul ends up. And that's a great responsibility. Not that the child eventually is not going to, once they reach the age of accountability, is not going to have to answer for themselves, but you play a huge role and you have a huge responsibility in that. Here's some stats on the faithfulness of children when talking about the faithfulness of the parents. So both parents are faithful. 72% of the time their children are faithful. Only father is faithful. Now we go down to 55% of the time they're faithful. Only mother is faithful, 15%. No parent is faithful, it goes down to 6%. So your faithfulness has a lot to do with that. So the last thing that I'll say is, with the soul that you have created, have you created one more soul for heaven or one more soul for hell? So discipline is extremely important and something that we need to be mindful of as parents. So we'll pick up next week with lesson 6. Thanks, everybody.